Pretty welcome to the video. It's Thursday, August 5th, and we have a split slate day over on DraftKings today. And yes, we're breaking down both. But we have a 5-game early slate that starts around 1 p.m. Eastern. Then we have the 6-game main slate tonight that starts around its normal time of 7 o'clock. And the pitching, once again, really isn't that great. Yesterday's slate was awesome for pitching. As far as today goes, it's kind of, we have a couple of solid options here, but the bats are looking real good. So this should be a fun one to break down today on both slates. And if you do find this content enjoyable in any way possible, please leave a like. That really does help me out in the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. I'll be here all season long breaking down MLB, then NFL and NASCAR when the time comes for that. And if you want to take it one step further and become an official Patreon member, I do appreciate everyone that does take the time to do that. But you do get access to some extra content, which includes my entire spreadsheet, projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, my Discord community, all that fun stuff. Link can be found down below right beside the orange bubble. You can't miss it. It's only like $10 a month to join the Discord channel, so I do think it's a pretty fair price. If you want to check it out, link is down below for that. And like I said, I do cover other sports just besides baseball. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you head over to prizepicks.com or use the link down below, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. It's an instant deposit match up to $100, so it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you? But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive right into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers, then move on to the bats. And we'll start up top here with Aaron Nola, $10,300. And like I was saying, we're going to be covering both slates today. So if you just look at the time slot right under the matchup info column, it'll tell you exactly when these guys are starting. So Aaron Nola, obviously starting at 4:05 p.m., which means he's on the early slate today. And on the early slate, there's really not that many great pitching options whatsoever. I only have two guys listed on here. It's him and Alex Wood, the two most expensive pitchers on these slates. So you're probably thinking, well, yeah, obviously, but yeah, it is obvious because there's no other really good pitchers on the slate. And like, yeah, Joe Ross is there. Martin Perez plays Detroit, but he kind of sucks. Tariq Skubal is an interesting option, but he's playing Boston. And he has trouble with the righty power. And we got guys like JD Martinez, Hunter Renfroe, and Bogarts in the lineup, and Kike Hernandez. So not overly in love with any of those guys. So my plan was to probably just spend it for the pitching, which these guys draw some okay matchups here. Nola gets Washington. Alex Wood gets Arizona. I prefer righties versus Arizona, but I think he'll be fine here. He's been solid all season long, but I was like, nothing else I really like. I don't want to play Dylan Bundy. It's a good matchup versus Texas, but I can't really trust those pitchers, and there's enough value bats to make it work. I was looking, you can make some Coors Field stacks work even if you double spend it for pitchers, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. But we'll talk about Aaron Nola here first. Like I said, very expensive at $10,300, but only a 3.8 implied team total against him. Pretty heavy favorite. 7K prop. His numbers in the season have been pretty darn solid with a 3.3 Sierra, an xFIP under 3.5, even though his ERA is around 4.3, but a solid 28.8% K rate. Doesn't really walk too many guys. He has given up some pop this season, but there's really no one good in this lineup besides a guy like Juan Soto. Josh Bell obviously has some power, but obviously no more Trey Turner. There's no Josh Harrison. Starlin Castro is gone. Young Gomes is gone. It's a pretty watered down lineup for the most part. Yes, a guy like Juan Soto can always give you some issues, but I think if you just kind of pitch around him for the most part, I think Aaron Nola will be just fine. Projection-wise, he's definitely the best play on the slate, and I would have a hard time not playing Aaron Nola. Yes, he's going to be insane chalk, but I'd rather get different with my bats or maybe even SP2. I feel like you just kind of have to lock in Aaron Nola. If he fails, so be it. His ownership should be at a point where it's not going to kill you in cash games or in like single entry tournaments. If you're playing 150 lineups, yeah, you might want to have some without Aaron Nola, but the way the slate is, it's a very small slate, and there's really no good pitching options besides Aaron Nola and Alex Wood, so I just kind of lock in Aaron Nola and move on with my day at that point. And then dropped in at Framber Valdez, $9,900. The same thing goes for the late slate as it does for the early slate, where there's really not that many great pitchers. So Framber Valdez does look like one of the top spend-up options, if not the best top spend-up option on the entire slate there. Sonny Gray's also a very good option, but he's been a bit shaky this season, which I guess Valdez did have that stretch of a few bad games, but outside of those, he's actually been pretty solid this season. I don't love the spot here versus Minnesota, but it's a pitch-friendly park in Houston. He's a very heavy favorite, 70% chance for a win, only a 3.65 implied team total against them. And if we're looking at his numbers on the season, it's nothing too great here, but the one appeal for Framber Valdez is that he has such a high ground ball rate. Like, it's kind of hard to believe. I know it's a smaller sample size for him compared to other pitchers, where he only has 71 innings pitched this year, unlike Aaron Nola, where he's got over 120, Alex Wood close to 100, but even then, it's a solid enough sample size. He's got a 71.3% ground ball rate this season. Like, that is insane. That's such a good ground ball rate. Only a .064 ISO given up, only a 14.9% fly ball rate, less than a homer allowed per 9, and only a 26.6 hard contact percentage allowed. Now, his strikeout rate's not amazing, only 21.5%, 3.6 xFIP, which I'm not going to complain about too much. Kind of just chasing that really high ground ball rate here. I don't love the matchup versus Minnesota, but Houston stack does look pretty solid on this slate. He's a very heavy favorite. I think he can get that 4-point win bonus. I feel like you could play him and Sonny Gray together, but if you can't and you had to pick between the two, Sonny Gray, $600 cheaper, is definitely more appealing, but I feel like Framber Valdez is definitely just a very solid play tonight. Yeah, Minnesota's not my favorite team to pick on, because they do have some pop versus lefties, but trading away Nelson Cruz definitely helps some things as well. So I think Valdez, I know he's a bit pricey, but he's a good projection play on the late slate tonight. Then Alex Wood, $9,600. He looks like one of the only other viable pitching options on the early slate today. I realize both these guys are a bit pricey. You're kind of combining them around $20,000, which is a bit up there, but there's some really cheap outfitters you can use in Coors Field today, like Rafael Ortega, Sam Hilliard, and even over in San Francisco, Alex Dickerson, I think, is like at $3,000 or below $3,000, and he's just been hitting the ball pretty well recently, so it's not that hard to fit in some expensive pitching on the early slate and still get some bats that you like. Now, is Alex Wood the most exciting pitcher in the world? Not at all. He doesn't usually work super deep into the games either, only averaging around 90 pitches per game, but he's got a decent 25% K rate. Doesn't really walk a ton of guys. The power's pretty solid. I mean, only 152 ISO given up, which is actually below Aaron Nola. Good ground ball rate at 54%, which 54% ground ball rate is actually really good. But when you compare it to a guy like Valdez that's over 70%, it's not going to look as bright green there, but it's still very, very darn good. And just about a homer allowed per 9. And like I was mentioning earlier, I prefer righties versus Arizona because their splits are a bit worse. Like versus righties this season, only a 135 ISO, 82 WRC plus, and over a 24% K rate. But versus lefties this season, over 100 ISO, 326 WOBA, 176 ISO, and only a 21% strikeout rate. So it's definitely a tougher spot here as a lefty than you are versus a righty here versus Arizona. But I think Alex Wood's going to be just fine here. I like the San Francisco stack quite a bit. I think they can pick up the win. That 4-point bonus always does go a long way. So I think he's a very solid option on the early slate today. And then dropping down to Sonny Gray here, he's $600 cheaper than Framber Valdez. So if you want to bypass Valdez at that price point, you think he's a little bit overpriced, I totally understand that. I think he is too, but relative to the slate, I mean, we just kind of have to play with what DraftKings gives us. But Sonny Gray, I mean, he's got more strikeout upside than Framber Valdez does, and this is a very soft matchup versus Pittsburgh. And there's an even lower implied team total here at 3.6 compared to 3.65. He's a heavy favorite. I think the Cincinnati Red stack is one of the absolute best in the entire slate here, so I think he should be able to pick up the win, assuming he doesn't get blown up here. The only problem is he's pitching in Cincinnati, which is one of the absolute worst places to pitch in all of baseball. It's like mini Coors Field there, especially at this time of the season when it's hot and muggy in Cincy. And trust me, I'm pretty close to that area, so I realize it does get very humid in August and late summer. But anyway, good spot here versus Pittsburgh. The only problem is they don't really strike out too much, but they shipped off Adam Frazier, and it's just a bad lineup. I mean, they got a couple guys like a Brian Hayes, but I mean, are you really scared of anybody on Pittsburgh? I'm only really scared of the ballpark, and Sonny Gray's been up and down this year, but he's boasting a K rate just shy of 30%, a real solid 3.32 xFIP, which is about a run lower than his ERA, so he has been getting a bit unlucky this season. About a 3.5 Sierra, close to 11.5 Ks per 9, so Sonny Gray, $9,300. Definitely think he's a very solid option tonight. I definitely think you can make a case for him over Framber Valdez today just because of the strikeout upside that he has. Then Touki Toussaint, if you're looking for a cheap SP2, he makes some sense if you're looking for some expensive stacks today. St. Louis is not a high strikeout matchup, but they are a team that will overall struggle versus right-handed pitching. And I do like the Brave stack quite a bit today versus Wade LeBlanc, so I think he could easily pick up the win as long as he can go those 5+ innings. He's been averaging around 80-some pitches per game so far, and while I realized his last start wasn't that great versus Milwaukee, I think we have to remember that it was some pretty prime hitting conditions in that game, and it was like that for like the whole series from Milwaukee and Atlanta, because there was a lot of good pitchers on the mound on both sides of the game, and a couple times even for specifically the Brewers, Brandon Woodruff and Corbin Burns. Specifically Corbin Burns, he got rocked in the first inning in that one game, but it was really good hitting conditions, so I'm going to give these guys a pass. But Touki Toussaint, so far in limited sample size this season, he's pitched 3 games so far, and his numbers aren't that bad. It's a super small sample size, so I hate to put really too much of anything into it. His ERA is pretty gross, so close to 5, but his xFIP's at 3.02, Sierra 3.25, just close to a 30% carry, not too far behind Sonny Gray, only 0.8% off. Hasn't really walked too many guys. Hasn't given up a ton of power, a 167 ISO, which is it's not too far up there, but it's a little bit up there. But it's still below Aaron Nola. Again, small sample size here, but he's had a lean to the ground balls. over a homer and a half per nine, a 33% hard contact rate. But St. Louis is a team that really doesn't pose too much of a power threat versus righties this season. Only an 86 WRC plus, 7.6% walk rate, 149 team ISO, and a well below 300. Like I said, they don't strike out too much, but I think just from a run prevention standpoint, Touki Toussaint should be fine. If he can pick up the win, that's going to look really good as well. So I think it's going to be it for the pitching for the most part. So you can move right over to today's stacks. We're going to start with some early slate stacks here. We'll start with the Colorado Rockies playing at home in Denver, in Coors Field, the best place to hit in all of baseball, and they get a pretty bad pitcher on the mound in Jake Arrieta. Not a big strikeout guy, especially struggles with left-handed bats, and this is looking like a pretty good stack today. There's no implied team total out yet for the Rockies, but if I had to guess what it's going to be, it's kind of been in the low sixes the past couple games, and Jake is not very good. It's going to be pretty hot, around 90 degrees by the time this game is played. So I would probably guess close to 7 here, about 6.5. I think would be the solid guess there. 6.4, 6.5, something like that. But all these guys are certainly in play for me, and they're not overly expensive besides Trevor Story. But Raimel Tapia, $4,300, not a big power guy, but he just have decent contact versus righties. Brendan Rodgers, not a super exciting bat, but he's cheap enough, and he kind of produced last night. I know Coors Field kind of sucked yesterday, but there was actually quite a few bats that ended up having some decently solid games for their price points. Like Trevor Story got on base a few times. I think he hit a run in. Brendan Rodgers got a couple of hits. Raimel Tapia had like a double and a run, and like an RBI, I think, or something like that. So even though it wasn't like a super high scoring game, it wasn't terrible for fantasy. Like it got the job done. I had some stacks that ended up working out with a couple Colorado Rockies in there. Obviously wanted more, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world for a 3-2 ball game. Even some of the Cubs, like Patrick Wisdom, I think he ended up with like, I don't know, say like 14, 17 points, something like that. But anyway, all these guys are certainly in play for me. Trevor Story is obviously the top option here. He's certainly the best bat in the lineup. It does come with the price point, but if you want some cheaper options, Ryan McMahon, he's also eligible at second base, third base. CJ Cron, prefer him versus lefties, but I'm not really scared of Jake Arrieta. You can use anybody versus him. Sam Hilliard, $2,600. He's got some pop versus righties, and I think at that price point, especially if people are double spending it for pitchers on the slate, I think Sam Hilliard can end up being a pretty popular option to make some stacks work today. And then Diaz, if you just want the Coors Field catcher, you could certainly go with that. I know he's kind of expensive, but Wilson Contreras is even more expensive, so he's definitely the cheaper of the bunch here. But definitely pretty much the top stack on the early slate. These guys aren't absolute must plays, but in Coors Field, they're going to have a team total probably around 6.5 here versus Jake Arrieta. They're definitely one of the top options on the entire slate. And another stack I like quite a bit today on the early slate is the San Francisco Giants facing off versus Merrill Kelly, who's not the worst pitcher in the world, but the guy does struggle with power and hard contact, and the Giants have been swinging some pretty hot bats recently. I think that continues here on the road in Arizona versus Merrill Kelly, and I always like getting guys on the road because you get those guaranteed nothing at bats as well. But all these guys do hit right-handed pitching pretty well for the most part. Lamont Wade, he's been crushing righties this season with over a 250 ISO. The new addition of Chris Bryant takes this offense to another level. Mike Yastrzemski, $4,700, a little bit up there in price. He was a little bit cheaper a couple of days ago when I think he was like a core play for me. I think he was only like $4,000, ended up going deep. I think that was that game versus Arizona. The price is up there now, so it's a little bit harder to fit him in, but he's still a fine option versus righties. Buster Posey, he's been one of the best hitting catchers in baseball. And Alex Dickerson, $3,200. I think in cash games, he's going to be one of those guys you want to fit in because he's just too cheap in my opinion. He's been swinging a hot bat. I think that one game he had a homer and a triple. He went deep again last night or tonight, whenever you're watching this video. I guess, well, I'm going to post in the morning, so last night. But yeah, Dickerson at that price point just seems way too cheap for me. He's pretty solid versus righties. Brandon Crawford, nice lefty and righty matchup there. Wilmer Flores, I prefer him versus lefties, but you can still play him versus righties. He has some okay splits versus them this season. And then at the very end of this lineup, you just have some lineup fillers here, but it comes with the price point, which is not bad if you just need a cheap portion of this offense here. But the Giants do look pretty good to me versus Merrill Kelly. They have a team total close to 5.5, and they've been playing some pretty strong baseball recently. They're kind of running up the score right now. I think last time I looked, it was like 7 or 8 runs for them. The game wasn't over either. And the last team I want to talk about on the early slate is going to be the Boston Red Sox. Yes, I know I didn't mention the Cubs. You can play the Cubs here. Even if I don't mention a team, I still like some of those guys as one-offs, like Rafael Ortega. You can obviously play him in cash games today. He's like $3,000 leading off versus a righty. He's been playing some pretty good baseball recently. Just because they're not on here doesn't mean they're not in play. It's just that I want to talk about the entire stack because the Cubs, I'm not overly in love with them because the lineup is pretty bad outside of a couple of bats. But I like Boston here, specifically the righties versus Schoolboy. I think Schoolboy's a good pitcher. He's got a good carry, but he really struggles against righties, and he gives up a lot of power versus them. Because if you look at his splits this season, you're going to see a good K rate to righties, but you're going to see some of the weaknesses that he has right now. Like, he's got a really solid 25.7% carry, but he gives up a 269 ISO, a 39.5% hard contact rate, close to a 50% fly ball rate, and 2.5 homers per 9 versus right-handed bats. And we got a couple guys here that do hit lefties pretty well for power. Kike Hernandez, I know the price is up there, but leading off here, always like him versus lefties over the course of his career. Xander Bogaerts, he's been on fire this season, batting over 310 with over a 200 ISO. G. Martinez, for obvious reasons, we can always play him versus lefties. Hunter Renfroe, he does one thing well, and that's hit lefties for power. And then the rest of these guys are kind of lineup fillers for the most part. Bobby Dalbec is dirt cheap if you need a cheap first baseman, but the rest of these guys are kind of just filling in if you have some leftover roster spots that you need to fit in some cheap Boston righties. But you can play the lefties too, like Rafael Devers, Alex Verdugo. I mean, these guys are playable. I don't love them as much because Scooble's tougher on lefties, but at some point, if you think they're going to get the Scooble, they'll see a righty at some point. So if you're full stacking those guys, that makes sense. And kicking us off with the late main slate tonight, we're going to start with the Cincinnati Reds here in a good spot versus Will Crowe. They're playing at home in Great American Small Park, one of the best places to hit in all of baseball. They have a team total close to 5.5 here, and if we're looking at Will Crowe's splits on the season, there is nothing here that's going to make you want to shy away from the Cincinnati Reds. He's giving up over a 200 ISO in the season, a 5.5 ERA, an xFIP close to 5, only a 20% K rate with a double-digit walk rate, 219 ISO given up, decent amount of hard contact, and about 2 homers allowed per 9. So you can pretty much use the entire lineup here. I prefer the lefties, so Jesse Winker, Joey Votto, Max Schrock, who I did not play Max Schrock one time. This was a couple months ago. He was $2,000. I didn't play him. I didn't think it was going to be the end of the world because I like the lineup that I already had without him. He ended up scoring like 40 fantasy points. Not that that's relevant to this, but I'm just throwing it out there that we are not in good terms because of that one time I did not play Max Schrock for some reason. Tyler Naquin, we know he's got good pop versus righties, but the main appeal here would be Jesse Winker. It's a massive price point, but all the lefties here I think make plenty of sense and definitely one of the best stacks in the entire slate. The righties, they're kind of secondary plays for me, but if you can fit them in, I like the full on stack for the Reds. But if you're just looking for the value bats here, guys like Kyle Farmer, who's kind of got bumped up in the order recently, Max Schrock, Tyler Naquin, it's not that hard to fit those guys in. Even guys like Eugenio Suarez and Tucker Barnhart, who aren't the most exciting bats in the world. If you can't afford the Jesse Winkers, Indias, or Joey Votto, why not just take some cheap pieces of that stack, and I think you can still kind of make a decent lineup out of those guys. And then moving on to a super expensive stack here, like these guys are always going to be stackable, but just when you kind of break it down, put this is my position, it's kind of hard to put these guys over some of the other bats just because of their price points. Like it's really hard to fit these guys in, and if you're double swinging for a pitcher today, I mean, good luck fitting in the Blue Jays. You're going to have to use a guy like Touki Toussaint to make this work, but all these guys are in a fantastic spot versus Tristan McKenzie. I don't think Tristan McKenzie is the absolute worst pitcher out there, but he's still young and developing, and he definitely has his struggles in certain aspects. Like, he's got a good K rate. It's close to 30% this season, but his ERA is over 6. His xFIP's over 5. He's got a 16% walk rate. He's giving up a 222 ISO on the season, over a 50% fly ball rate, and a 35% hard contact rate, and a good amount of homers as well. And the Blue Jays definitely profile well pretty much versus every single pitcher. All these guys are uber talented. George Springer, Vlad, Marcus Semien, Bo Bichette, Teoscar Hernandez, Corey Dickerson. Like 1 through 6, there's not a bad bat here. And I know Corey Dickerson's a new addition here, but he's actually one of the cheaper bats here. Gurriel's okay. Espinal, I mean, these guys are kind of lineup fillers for the most part, but the beef for that order, 1 through 5, is just absolutely excellent, although they're all over $5,000. So you can't get a discount with them. You have to find some cheap pitchers. There's some really cheap secondary stacks or one-offs to fit with these guys, but obviously they're in a good spot. Team total close to 6. It's a hitter-friendly park in Toronto. If you got the money for them, great. If not, don't think it's the end of the world, but overall they're going to grade out well in projections, just not point per dollar wise. And then the last stack I want to talk about tonight is the Atlanta Braves here versus Wade LeBlanc, and this is a very similar spot like they were last night in versus J. Happ. And the St. Louis Cardinals rotation right now is absolutely horrible. There's a bunch of bad lefties in a row. They have John Lester, they have Happ, they have Wade LeBlanc, and you can definitely target righties versus all those guys. And there's quite a few guys in Atlanta that do profile pretty well versus left-handed pitching, especially soft-tossing lefties like Wade LeBlanc, a guy that will give up power, hard contact, and fly balls to righties. And just looking at the lineup here, and it's not the most expensive stack out there. Yeah, there's a couple of expensive guys here, but you can kind of make it work. It's not going to be a heavy burden on your pockets tonight. But if we're looking at some of these guys' splits versus lefties this season, Ozzie Albies, he kind of leads the list here, batting leadoff. Got an ISO close to 300 this year versus lefties. 638 slugging, only a 12% K rate, OPS around 1,000, 340 batting average, and a WOBA over 400. So he's definitely the top option here. Jorge Soler, I know he's kind of been awful this year, but he's got some pop versus lefties, and I feel like ever since he went to Atlanta, he's been playing a little bit better. Freddie Freeman, people are going to leave him off because of the lefty and lefty matchup, but I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. If you think the Brave stack looks good tonight, you're assuming that Wade LeBlanc won't last too long into this game. And LeBlanc's also allowing over a 180 ISO to lefties this season, so I wouldn't be concerned about it whatsoever. Austin Riley's been swinging a hot bat recently. He's got plenty of pop versus lefties. Dansby Swanson, another guy, ready on lefty matchup here. Adam Duvall, he's got power versus lefties. And then Jock Peterson, he's like the one guy I'd probably lead off because it's a lefty on lefty spot here, but at some point he'll see a righty anyway, and I know he's a little bit lower in the order, but he's not bad price-wise, and I mean, if you're just looking to be contrarian on a somewhat popular stack tonight, I don't hate Jock Peterson. And then Kevin Smith is free, $2,100, and he's already on the matchup here versus Wade LeBlanc. But that being said, guys, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. And if you want to take that one step further and become an official member over on Patreon, link is down below in the description for that. But you get access into my entire cheat sheet, which goes position by position, has all the projections in there, Vegas totals, and all that fun stuff. The goal of it is to make everything easier for you throughout the day when you do your research. And it's got a Discord channel, projections, optimizers, and all that fun stuff. Link can be found down below. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. It's just you versus the projections, no sharks, salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on Prize Picks and use code CPEN and tell them I sent you, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. There's an instant deposit match up to $100. It's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you, either prizepicks.com or use the link down below. But I think that's going to be pretty much it, guys. I will stop rambling, and I'll see you on Friday for the next video.